Hi everyone, my name is Boris Mann and you are at an Proto Tech Talks video. We have Drew McArthur and he's going to be talking about his project PMsky, which is enabling peer moderation on Bluesky and the App Proto. So take it away, Drew.
Cool. Let's see. To share my screen. Um, should have tried this right before we hit recording. Might have to quit and rejoin, but I'll be back in a
Okay.
moment.
Exactly.
We could also probably stop recording and start again.
Yeah, that would be good.
I like to do straight out of the video.
All
You're
right,
just asking me to do work, Sebastian.
That's fair. I can't believe I would even
Okay, I'm back.
guy who does the least work
all right.
I see.
Perfect. Hey, Anuj, welcome.
All right, so I have a couple of slides that I put together.
Perfect.
Nice.
Do you see the slide? Is that right?
You have your oh yeah, sorry. We do have two screens here.
Do I? Try again.
No.
We're getting the mostly empty purple. Yeah. There we go.
That's the one. Yeah,
That's
we're
right.
good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, yeah. Cool. Well, yeah. I call this interchangeably PMsky, which stands for peer moderation, and afternoon sky because is it post meridian? Is that what that stands for? And I've heard other people kind of pronounce their projects differently. So this could be also Pimsky or Pomsky, I think is a type of Pomeranian, maybe. Pomsky, oh, Pomeranian Husky, yeah. So any names are fine. I've toyed with capitalization. Really not sure where I'm gonna land on that. I'm not a branding guru, but yeah, this is about enabling peer moderation. To start a little bit, I'm Drew. I'm a software engineer. I'm in Boulder, Colorado. I started a little under 2 years ago at CU Boulder. I'm doing a master's degree in media and public engagement. And that's where this project kind of stems from. I'm really interested in cooperatives, and the driving question for that was really looking at kind of how people make decisions when you don't have somebody in charge making decisions for them. This really applies to cooperatives pretty obviously, but when I was looking at kind of options for a project to do for my thesis. Also been really interested in Bluesky and the ethos behind it, and all of the kind of tech is really interesting. Protocols are really cool, and it seemed like a great place to be experimenting. At Proto and Bluesky itself is an experiment, and so is this project. I'm not claiming that peer moderation is a fantastic idea. It might be a stupid idea. I don't think it's a profoundly stupid idea, as some have said. But maybe it's stupid, maybe it's profound. We'll find out later. Um, so yeah, I don't know if this is necessarily a perfect idea, but I'm not saying that this should replace all the other applications of moderation that we have on Bluesky, but I think part of the ethos that Bluesky has is that there are different layers, and so I'm hoping that this is kind of a building block to an additional layer of moderation. We have the platform doing moderation, we have third-party labelers. The idea for this is to enable a new type of, well, I termed it fourth party labeling, where like breaking the fourth wall, that sense of fourth perspective. Yeah, an additional layer, not the only layer. So the gap that I'm trying to fill, with traditional platforms, you have any platform providing user-generated content is going to have to moderate that. It's obviously necessary, but a lot of the time there can be a conflict of interest between the platform and what they want to show users, and then what users actually want to see. Bluesky takes a really cool approach to this by what they call composable moderation. I'm sure we all know about third-party labelers. Basically, you can code your own service that will publish labels onto the network. They're opt-in, anyone can subscribe. You only see labels that you subscribe to. And going back to cooperatives and how like what I'm interested in is like the power dynamics of that decision making. And in this case, while it separates out between the platform and the people doing the labeling, it's still a really concentrated group of people. If it's a group at all, it might just be one person running labeler. And so while we've seen a lot of great examples of these labelers, there's also some not so great examples. I think early on, I don't know if Aegis is how it's pronounced, but early on there was a labeler that got really popular. That was this third-party moderation service. I'm not totally sure who was running it. It wasn't like totally available, or maybe that was public information, but that ended up kind of blowing up when somebody who was running the labeler had a personal dispute and ended up leveraging that to label different accounts based on personal whims rather than like serving the community that they were trying to serve. And so in both cases, whether it's a third-party labeler or the platform itself, the issue is this concentration of power. And so that's what I wanted to explore more broadly, is how we could try to achieve a layer of moderation that is, consensus based. It is people kind of, it's peer moderation in the sense that there isn't a certain group of people in a privileged position making those decisions. A lot of the inspiration comes from something like Reddit or Wikipedia, where, I mean, on Wikipedia there are administrators, but and Reddit has moderators, but a lot of the content on Wikipedia can be edited by anybody. A lot of the content on Reddit is voted up or down by anybody, and that's sort of the first layer of defense for the content in those places. And so that's sort of what I have in mind for PMsky, is to create the building blocks to allow for that. So what I have right now is just, you can create a label based on a post, and then you can vote those up or down. Both of those labels and votes are at Proto Records. And so the idea then is that you could build a labeler that would use those votes however it wants to define consensus. Essentially, I'm just trying to introduce a new primitive into this conversation. That's the extent of the lexicon so far. I'm not totally confident that it's a perfect lexicon, but we'll evolve as we go. It's based off of the @proto label definition that they had. I created my own because there was some weirdness about creating records with that definition type. But closely mirrors that. It basically has a value, which is the label, and the subject is what other record it points to. So that could be a post, it could be a user account, it could be, I think those are the two, but I feel like there's a third. Basically any other record a label could apply to. And then same thing with a vote, where generally it has a value either up or down. And then it has a subject of a label that it's applying to. And this could also, we could apply votes to different users and create a reputation system, right? Similar to Reddit, where they have karma. And then that could be used in different ways, whether it's, creating a feed that filters out people with low karma, or creating a labeler like, oh, this account has really low karma, like they're just trolling, so don't bother interacting, that type of thing. But yeah, so the idea then is just to allow for different labelers to be built around different use cases. The idea is for this to be Legos. one example would be a simple one would just be a spam labeler, where if 90% of people agree that this post is spam, then it's probably spam. And so we attach that label because out of the 100 votes, 90 of them agreed that the spam label applies to this post. So we publish that label. You could have, a spectrum of labels where it goes from potential spam to likely spam to disputed, that type of thing, where again, just based on the number of votes up or down, you could do a little bit of math to say, well, 30% of people say it's spam, so it's like, we'll just call it potential and push that onto the network. And then I on Bluesky can subscribe to that labeler and I can adjust like, well, I don't mind seeing potential spam, but I definitely want to be warned if 80% of people are saying that it's likely to be spam. And so that's just one example of one label. Planning on kind of having a strict set of labels that are available and then expanding that as time goes on. That's part of I'll get into kind of how some of those decisions will be made later. But another example would be some of the self-service labelers that we have. Right now, you kind of like a post and you get a label attached to your account, but that could just as easily be based on the votes on PMsky if we didn't want to utter Bluesky with that kind of interaction, right? In order to make that work, you'd have to have votes be public. So one of the details right now is that I've decided to make votes private as records. So rather than when you click vote on PMsky, rather than publishing a record to your PDS, it would publish to the pmsky.social PDS, a vote record that is relatively anonymous. There are then databases within the PMsky platform, within the service, that are keeping track of which users voted, and a different table that's keeping track of the values of those votes. So they're somewhat separated. I think theoretically I could dig in and figure out how people are voting, but the idea is that initially that kind of thing is private because it could potentially be sensitive. So I want to avoid that to start with. I think later on, one of the things that could be down the road on a roadmap would be those kind of public votes, because that would allow for, like, for example, if I wanted a labeler that was only listening to a couple of people's votes or only people with a certain label or something like that. Like there's a lot of moving pieces here that I think could allow for really interesting configurations of peer moderation. I'm definitely going a lot faster than I intended. So sorry about that. But
No, it's good. We're having chatter. We're queuing up questions. We'll dive into it.
Don't
So
worry, we can draw you out.
perfect. But yeah, so I think that kind of covers what I wanted to get at. That's kind of where I'm coming from, my motivation, and like the idea I have in mind. When it comes to sort of how some of these decisions are made later on, like, what labels are allowed. I have in mind sort of a meta feed within this app where the labels that are allowed to be voted on could be decided based on votes in that meta feed rather than me deciding, oh yeah, this label is okay, this label isn't. Again, have that be consensus based. Since there is some pushback, some people who don't think this is a good idea, one of the things I'd like to implement is a kill switch where if people vote that, oh, we should get rid of this, then the server just kind of nukes itself. If there's
No.
some level of consensus to that.
RF.
Right, because again, I don't
Likewise.
want to give myself a privileged position in how this operates in the same way that I am trying to create something where there is moderation without different levels of power dynamics and that kind of thing. So I'm trying to think consciously about um, how my role in this platform, in the same way that moderators and moderation, how that all plays out. And yeah, so this is a project for that I'm starting as a degree project. But I'm hoping that if this goes well, then it sort of expands beyond just me. I don't want to be the only person in charge of it. I tried applying for Open Collective, but they were like, "Well, you haven't even started yet." And I was like, "Well, yeah, I don't want to like buy the domain myself. I want to like put it through the anyways." Um, so yeah, that's yeah, and I want to be mindful of sort of the trajectory that moderation on Bluesky has taken. I think that there's kind of a lot of lore around early Bluesky and kind of a lot of the where a lot of the push on Bluesky the company came from in terms of the earlier trans users, and I want to make sure that this is something that is serving all of the communities, and especially communities that are more vulnerable to um, these kind of issues in moderation and kind of harm on the internet generally. So I want to make sure that this is kind of useful for everybody, and especially people who kind of need a bigger toolbox.
Awesome.
Yeah. Very, very cool. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a ton of stuff here. Um, Surprising to me right away was the that you're privatizing and anonymizing the votes. I think that's a really, really interesting pattern. Can we maybe, I think maybe useful to even talk about the pieces. So Brian has some questions there as well. Maybe we can talk through how this would work for primitives just to get a real sense of it. Um, so a labeler today um, has a defined set of labels, and I think with what you're saying, you will have a PMsky labeler where the label itself, like you talked about spam. Let's use that as an example. Are you going to pre-create spam as a label?
So the I can pull up kind of what the oh well, I don't have it hosted actually, but the the platform itself is kind of two steps where like, oh, I see a post, I'm going to copy that URL over and then create a label, right? And so that creates an instance of a label, not a label
Yeah,
definition, right?
yeah, yeah.
And then the platform itself is just a feed of these label instances, which then users would vote up and down whether the label instance makes sense. So is this post actually spam or not? Um, in terms of, so yes, that is one labeler that I could see myself creating to want to set up. But the idea is that that's independent from PMsky itself, right? You can build whatever labeler you want using these records.
So, and just some wording, not
Mhm.
labeler, but label. So if on the front side, if I am a Bluesky user and I subscribe to PMsky,
Mhm.
PMsky will have hundreds of labels.
Or there could be several labelers within PMsky,
Okay,
right?
but
So
how
there
is it
could
going to
be a
be right
spam
now?
PMsky labeler,
Okay,
and
okay,
that might have like 5 different levels of spam
okay,
based on the level of confidence,
Is
but
it?
then that could be a separate labeler, right? The idea is that, and not even me, like anyone could go and create a labeler that's based on the vote records that they're finding. I think it would make sense for me to create the first couple of labelers. Um, but yeah, it could be separate labelers. I think it probably makes sense to sort of separate it based on probably to keep it relatively separate rather than having one labeler with
okay,
100 labels.
okay. The one I'm thinking of is the GitHub projects labeler, which is kind of
Mhm.
fun.
Hmm.
So I'll step back a bit. Brian's asking about this. So um, basically, there's the concept of labelers. All of these things have also DIDs, identities in the system. So you have to do some back end work to create a labeler There's some templates and tooling, so you got to run a service and then you register it with the App Proto network, and it will be owned by an account. I guess that's called a service account. Please, anyone interrupt me. I'm doing this from memory. And then you have a labeler, and you can browse to it in the Bluesky apps. You can subscribe to the labeler, and once you're subscribed to the labeler, then you will see all the labels that labeler applies. And it can apply it in any way. As Drew was saying, most of these are centrally managed. Some of them might be automated, like Aindra's XBlock, which looks at images and tries to use machine learning to figure out whether or not they're a Twitter or Facebook or other social screenshot. And then as a user, you can choose whether to show a warning, hide them completely, or in fact not display the label at all. So all of this is opt-in for all users. So the first step that any user would have to take to view PMsky labels is to opt into one of the PMsky labelers. I welcome anyone to correct me or ask questions.
Can I just get a clarification? Because I think maybe there's a little bit of overloading happening. These labelers are this. I'm sorry, PMsky labelers are the same as a normal labeler. You can in theory, through PMsky, we can start creating vote records on anyone's labeler, any labelers that already exist, or does it have to be one that was created with the PMsky label record type?
Yeah, more the latter.
Okay.
I think in theory you could, because a vote record is just going to say like, okay, vote and agree or disagree, and it points to this other record. So I think in theory, those votes could apply to kind of any label record. I got a little bit confused about like how label records are stored on App Proto, which is why I was just like, I'm just gonna, okay, here's my own record type. And if you create a label on PMsky, then it is a social.pmsky.label.
It's on the PMsky lexicon.
Yeah.
Right. But in theory, this vote records could be placed on other lexicons.
Yeah, and they could be applied to any record, right? The subject is just a pointer to another at record.
So to some extent, this is just we're creating the vote lexicon.
Yeah, exactly. And the only difference between a PMsky labeler and a normal labeler is that the normal labeler, like Boris was saying, either is automated or somebody is sitting there at the computer saying yes or no.
Mm-hmm.
The only difference is now that algorithm for deciding should I apply this label or not is pulling in those vote records and using that to make its decision.
Okay, so that would be that's another level of that. At that point, you've got a labeler that is referring to the PMsky vote records.
Yes.
And is that correct?
Less referring. So let's actually walk through. So
okay.
I go over. I'm going to say PMsky because I just looked up a picture of a puppy that's a Pomeranian Husky cross. Like again, animal mascots.
Mm-hmm. Branding. It's got to be it.
First of all of Japan will sign up. So that's a thing too that you should consider. So PMsky, you go in and it's an app. We log in with our App Proto credentials. And in fact, let's consider it's a dog labeler, and you see a post that contains an image of a dog, and it's a PMsky or not, and you could vote up or down whether it's like a breed of dog or something like that. So we're logged in, and this is the part that I'm super curious about. So I'm logged in, I'm my App Proto ID. and I'm opted in and I make a vote. But what I think you said is that vote, um, it's tracked in the fact that I'm logged in and I've made it, and it points to another thing, but you're anonymizing it and then writing it only to the pomsky.social repo,
Yep.
Yes, yeah.
which will be filled with lots of vote records.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? I know I don't want to actually like say exactly how you anonymize or whatever you're comfortable saying, because I think that's a new pattern where there's this sort of like app account that contains records is fascinating.
Yeah. Let's see. I don't want to pull the code up because I don't want to like accidentally open up the place where like my app password is or something like that. But yeah, that's exactly it, where I have two database tables. One is saying like, okay, Boris voted on this label, and then another table that's saying like, oh, there's a vote up for this label and there's a vote down for this label and whatever. Um, the former is to say like, okay, Boris can't vote again on this label, and then the latter is to actually calculate vote counts. Um, the only thing connecting those two tables is like the timestamp that the vote happens is probably lined up. So if I wanted to anonymize that further, I could kind of add a buffer of like a minute or something somewhere, like some random, I think that's called a salt, like onto what the timestamp is. Um, and then the latter table is essentially what gets published to at Proto, which is PMsky saying, hey, I have a new vote record. It applies to this label. It's a vote record up or down for this
Which
label.
would go on the fire hose that
Yeah.
anyone can listen to and consume and do other actions with. So
Yeah.
some other third party could also do things with that.
Yeah.
Could Boris change his vote?
At the moment, no, because they are because of the way that it's set up. If we wanted that as a feature, then that would involve like we could still have private votes. It just means that internally, rather than splitting those two tables internally, there is actually some tracking, which then means that if Boris wants to be able to change his vote, then I, as the person with the keys to the server, can theoretically go in and see what his vote is. So avoiding that at first, and then maybe that's a opt-in. I'm imagining sort of three levels of privacy where there is like, nope, I'm not allowed to change my vote, but nobody can find out how I voted. I would like to change my vote, and like internally you might know, but it's not published externally. And then public, where I'm publishing this vote record to my own PDS, which has other use cases and features, but is obviously much less private.
I mean, you could use this pattern to like do polling too, right? There's a lot. Yeah.
Right.
It's an interesting one because it end arounds are like the sad state of privacy on Bluesky for it seems like a limited pattern in that like
it actually centralizes the trust in Drew and the server runner, right? Like the fact that he's publishing PDS records is an interesting level of transparency. So like people could check his work in a certain way, maybe. Like there's some interesting stuff there. Right? Like if the vote counts don't match up, you don't know who voted. But you can see the vote records and that they point into a labeler. And I guess you can see whether they're +1 or -1.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. So somebody can independently aggregate those and for that matter have their own block list. No, sorry, they're anonymous voting. Okay, so it's like having a public database, but a lot of the math is behind the scenes in the private database of the server that Drew runs, which is the centralizing feature.
Right.
Which the code will be available. I guess the question is if that's the code that I deployed to the server or not.
And other people can run it. as an
Yeah.
example, and some other things like that, right? So there's it's just like Sebastian said, it's just if you want to do things like like you're anonymizing votes, then this is one pattern where you're making the data available on the fire hose. Yeah.
It's just this
Yeah.
this is interesting because there's a lot of foment around the idea of privacy and the possibilities that are not currently available to the community because we don't have solid privacy on at Proto. And so that's why what I meant by an end around. This is sort of like a gives up a lot of what you would be looking for in terms of decentralization in an on protocol privacy, sort of like getting the at Proto team to build out the privacy protocol, which they've talked about but don't have the time for. So this sort of like gives up a bunch of the decentralized part in order to be like, well, at least we can have a privacy pattern at the moment.
Right, exactly. And I think because I see in the chat there's a couple of kind of questions around that, which are very valid questions. I think that there are kind of two ways to address one thing is like
if you could read I'll read it out loud. So
Sure. Yeah.
an issue with anonymous voting is detecting voting rings and abuse. Have you thought of that? So you can go ahead and
So
answer that.
basically the two avenues for dealing with that is either the centralized within the platform in terms of these private votes, that has to be dealt with on the platform as far as, preventing those votes from being counted essentially and detecting that. The other option is, more public votes. And so it's a question of trust and where you put that. Because maybe I'm running a labeler and I don't trust whoever's running this voting platform. I'm only going to look at people who publicly vote and vote to submit their vote records to their own PDS. So I'm gonna ignore any of the votes that are in the PMsky.social PDS. So again, what I'm trying to do is kind of make these pieces of data available in a flexible way, right? And so you can have a completely private vote set, or you can have a more feature-filled ability to vote. But we haven't really figured out how to do both.
So you could do again, I don't know enough about this, but there's the probably like an audit log, which is an additional thing because can you anonymize the did?
Yeah.
But then again, you worry about the de-anonymizing step.
Yeah, exactly. It's how secure we want that privacy to be. And
Come on, zero knowledge proofs.
that's the ideal.
I'm just gonna shout words.
I would love that, and ideally this is like compatible with adding that in the future. But yeah, my thinking is that like having a range of privacy options available, and then maybe people all settle on this middle option where it's we're able to do more auditing, but it's slightly less secure.
I think it's useful. So we're at a sort of a technocratic level, and some of the layers in here really just are, I think it's useful to talk about abuse. So let's walk through a
Totally.
pattern. Let's say that the phrase mango hater is a slur, and we apply it to Chad. This is useful because Chad actually does hate mangoes. So we vote to create that label on PMsky. So that's the first question. Are you going to moderate label names?
So at first, yes, that's under my purview as far as what labels are allowed, because that's something I thought of. I obviously don't want people like labeling other posts with slurs using this. That would
Be bad.
Yep.
Yeah.
that'd be bad. And so then if we were to, then the question is, okay, how do we make that decision when it's not just me making the call? Because maybe I think that cis is also a slur, and so nobody should be able to whatever. And so how do we take me out of that equation? And so that's where I'm thinking like, okay, if we vote on which labels are allowed to apply, which label definitions are allowed to create label instances which apply to posts, um, then it's like, okay, what level of consensus do we need? If 90% of people agree that that mango hater is an okay label to apply, is that okay? Does it need to be 95? Does it need to be 99%, right? Like what level of dissent are we? And then again, I'm the one deciding what that threshold is, but ideally we can come up with some threshold that like, okay, if only 2% of people think that this is not okay, like we're fine with that. But
Well, can I
And John asked this. John, did you want to pipe up? And John and Ververn both had some thoughts on this. Do you want to unmute and talk about that?
Oh, I mean, I think it just relates to the specifics of the threat modeling in general. I think it's I just see all kinds of ways for people to attack the integrity of the voting process, to attack the labeler. So by getting a label approved that would violate Bluesky's terms of service for a labeler, and so take the labeler down, using smaller groups, or bots and Sybil attacks, taking advantage of the labeler. So maybe there are answers to these, but I think it's really important to start with the threat modeling for all of these things. The sort of, oh well, we'll build it and then figure out the abuse cases tends to go down an endless path of, oh, there's more abuse cases. So
Yeah. I think there's a mode here where we're moving from, so like Bluesky itself is at a size where they can't roll out anything without immediately looking at that, right? Um, I think there's a piece here where like there's a lot of opt-ins that has to happen before outrage happens. I signed up for Pomsky and I downvoted Mango Hater, but I got outvoted and I subscribed to um, the Pomsky labeler myself,
the
and
one
I
labeler
showed,
that uses that one label, right? Not just the generic.
yeah,
Yeah.
uh, uh, and I opted in to so sheeing it. It's still shitty, and the data is on the fire hose, but there's someone who is opting in to be outraged. I think there's meta things of how will people use this for off-platform abuse, possibly, or coordination. Like wink, wink, mango hater actually means I should probably do less examples and not keep pointing at Chad, but um, um, I wanted to center it a little actually in a way that Drew is not centering it, which is your underlying thesis is, um, or the question that you ask yourself is how peer-to-peer can I make elements of this? Is that correct? Can you maybe just dig in? Because I feel like that's a really centering place where you're like, look, this is a thesis thing. We're experimenting. We're building code to do it. And this is a what if around peer-to-peer. So you're thinking, including how to remove yourself as much as possible. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Maybe expand?
Yeah, totally. Like, so I was mentioning cooperatives at the beginning of this, and that's where a lot of my like first year kind of pointed to. And the question there is like, okay, how do you run a company when there isn't shareholders in charge, when there isn't a founder who's in charge, a CEO, whatever? And I think we kind of default to those traditionally hierarchical firms because it's sort of the easy way out. It's easier to have, one person in charge of making decisions. And I think the same kind of thing is the case with moderation, where up until Bluesky introduced labelers, like it was only the platform that was allowed to apply moderation because it just got too messy otherwise. And again, in the case of third-party labelers, it is still either algorithmic or it's a small group of people that are making those decisions, which works out most of the time, right? Obviously, like a lot of companies run just fine the way that they are. A lot of labelers are running great. It's the instance like Aegis or like Twitter, like we saw Elon just waltzed in and bought the whole thing. And so, okay, we recognize the issues with being able to just buy a company and take complete control of it. And so yeah, the philosophical question here is like, how do we make decisions without somebody in charge? And the context then is moderation and on Bluesky labeling posts. And so yeah, my question is like, how can we make that decision of should this label be published for this post or for this account? That's a really hefty decision to be making. So should that decision be concentrated in a couple of hands, or is there a way to make that decision wider based on more of a consensus based on like what everybody thinks rather than what a few people think? Because yeah, if it's a trusted few people, that works most of the time, until it doesn't.
Can I do maybe like a little thought experiment here? To what Boris was saying, this is currently the UX of this at the moment is like, let me see if I walk through this right. I'm a Bluesky. I have a Bluesky account. I hear about PMsky. I go and log into PMsky using my Bluesky account. Probably create a connection there. Then I'm using I'm going outside of Bluesky to go to PMsky to both do any of the sort of meta interactions around label creation, label voting on labels that have been created. And I'm also using PMsky to do the voting itself on. So PMsky now has to render my Bluesky feed in order for me to be able to, so it becomes a client itself.
So the feed on PMsky would just be a feed of labels to vote on, not necessarily your Bluesky feed. The way that I can walk through sort of the user path that I'm imagining is like, I'm scrolling on Bluesky, I see a post that should be labeled, and for whatever reason, like, Bluesky hasn't done anything about it, and then like this other labeler that's a third party also isn't doing anything about it. So I'm gonna, or maybe it's just faster to go to PMsky to bring it there. So I take the URL of that post, copy it over to PMsky. I say, oh, this is spam. I create the label. Now anyone who happens to be on PMsky sees that, could vote it up or down, and kind of that's it. For then some other user who's scrolling on Bluesky, they subscribe to the Bluesky moderation service, they subscribe to this third-party spam checker, whatever, and then they might subscribe to a different labeler that says, oh yeah, we use vote data, so it's like based on PMsky votes rather than based on actually where this Russian company that is not going to label misinformation for whatever, like, I don't know, I don't want to play into the geopolitical stuff, but so
Sure.
I just subscribe to a labeler that makes its decisions based on those votes, and maybe that's more or less trustworthy than existing labelers.
So we have it's a distinct set, voters and label subscribers as well. So we're now, a concern that I have in this flow is that there's a lot of steps to vote. So fine, we can massage that eventually, maybe. Also, if you have if you can subscribe to these labels without needing to set yourself up to vote, you are creating like a
welcome to every cooperative in the universe.
okay,
Which has active members and less active members in different ways. Like there's definitely tension there, because even there, a bunch of those people don't find themselves in the commons at all. You know, right away I think about a browser extension that could actually bring voting into the interface directly, right? Like, so you could be scrolling your feed and actually only vote on things that you like come across. That wouldn't even be that heavy. Like that's like that's my 10-second thought of like, here's how you do it. Third party clients. So I bring up Uranos a lot because Jam with Puria could decide to have a PMsky integrated flow that brings it into the front end of the interface. We're in uncharted territory directly. The closest we have is the web, generally, where there's huge amounts of contention around like a browser extension that like puts annotations on someone else's page.
Yep. And so like this, I mean, I think I appreciate the amount of immediate energy towards threat modeling and trying to figure out like, how does this not work? I'm still a little bit like, how does this work in like the even maybe getting away from like a Mango haters label and like just thinking through like, what about Mango lovers, or like you know, like friends of @proto, right? Like I want to make a label that says that this is like, I want friends of @proto to like notice these posts, something positive, just to think through like, how do we get there, and what's like, how to, like, none of the threat modeling also doesn't matter if we don't have a thing that is valuable.
Usable.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that wasn't really a question.
John, I wanted to bring you back in and just say temperature check. There's 83 bazillion steps and there will be 100 users. You know, I totally get what you were saying before, that like, again, like I was saying, like Bluesky scale, you can't freaking launch anything without thinking through all of the vectors. How does your thinking go for a third-party app like this, where labelers themselves are already locked in, are opt-in? Or what's your concern level, shall we say? Like, literally, Drew got haters, and no one would go on record and exclaim why. Just say it's never going to work. Civil attack. This is dangerous.
Right. I mean, my if you look closely, you'll see I like the response saying, "Oh, this is dangerous. It's never going to work." Civil attack. I mean, I think you know, my view in general is, so I don't actually think it will never work. I am not yet convinced that it will work. And in general, I think even when you're looking at it at a smaller scale initially, things that are successful then proceed to grow. So, you know, it gets adopted by a labeler that's a very popular label. Oh, suddenly you're getting the scale problems, even if it's not Bluesky at Bluesky scale. So, I mean, I agree with the point that it's not only the threat modeling, but I really think that unless the threat modeling is looked at up front, there's my temperature is skeptical at this point. It's an interesting idea, but without thinking of the abuse cases, it's basically ripe for abuse. Even if it's that, well, abusers have to opt in to be abusive through this, that's not going to be enough of a protection.
So go ahead.
Sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
So I also feel like there's something to, like that opt-in notion. You can say abusers would have to opt in, but I think that for me, like as somebody who's had horrible, I have PTSD, so I have a disability. Something really awful happened to me once on Facebook. I wish I had some ability to opt in to say that if I post on Facebook, if I do something on Facebook, and my community is like, she seems like she's triggered. This is not good for her life or her career. That my community could moderate me based on my consent, saying, I consent to my post being moderated. I consent to this level of safety moderation. I consent to moderation if somebody thinks, I'm a harm to myself, whether that's like self-harm or just harming my like social value, right, on social media. And then I actually don't really want to have other people in my social world who don't do opt-ins. Like, meaning if somebody comes in onto Bluesky and is like, I don't want anyone to moderate my stuff ever or whatever, to me, I look at that person like that person or entity or social group doesn't want to play with safety rules. So I don't want them in my purview. So like, I do think that even though like abusive factors can opt into safety measures, I think that there is like, I don't want to call it a market, but I think there is like a need around like people with disabilities, people who have, who can be easily triggered online, who need like content moderation, where we need to be able to say, I want to opt in, I want to have pure moderation, and then that builds your safety. I don't want to call it bubble, but it's sort of like your purview so that you can be on, if something does happen to me, and that's why I brought up 911, was for years, I saw very unsafe posts on Facebook. And I couldn't, you can create attention through controversy because that person's controversial post was probably like a mental breakdown and it created a lot of attention, but there's no safety measures. So like, I think my use case for something that's safer and like radically different from those other platforms is to build, I agree with threat modeling because you have to start with it, but like to build around a use case of like safety, like think of people who've got mental health challenges where we want to have like a mentally safe and healthy social media. Like what level are we willing to opt in? Who do we want to have around us? And we already have to do that in the real world. Like if you have mental health challenges, you can't just let anyone around you. You have to be, self-protective. So that's just something to say around the opt-in. And I don't know how much the abusers are. I mean, John, I agree they're going to opt in, right? They're going to be like, I want to opt in so I can participate in this labeling. But I think the opting in does filter out a lot personally. And it creates like this explicit consent model from day one.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm in general, I think opt-in is definitely, consent is really important. And I do think that there could well be some good use cases for this. So when I say I'm skeptical, I don't mean to say that I'm totally negative about that. I think, it's an interesting use case of, it's almost a block party consumer community defense kind of thing via this mechanism. There could well be, and this is Sebastian's point, what are the what are the sweet spots where this is solving the use case? I think there are some valid there may well be some good outcomes there. I think even in these cases, you've got to look at both the use cases and the abuse cases for these. And it's a fundamental challenge with, first of all, the Bluesky labeler model is not opt-in, and to some extent, if you're using labelers to control bad actors, well, spammers aren't going to opt in to being labeled for spam. So that's an inherent limitation on opt-in when it comes to labeler models. So you're inheriting some of the overall challenges of the labeler model. And so that's why it's a very good very good project. But challenges to figure out.
I think there's two things, Drew, that I'm seeing pulled out, and we're at the hour, so that we'll go off the record here for a little bit at the end, but let's wrap the recording. I think one of the things is people who are very deep in this can start imagining and dreaming, but I think obviously you can launch it and people start trying it, so that's an active thing. Anyone who wants to try this, there's an email on the PMsky website, or you want people to DM the account. Are those the two things? Right?
Yeah, it should be pretty straightforward if you're going onto the website. There's like a docs. There's a link to a docs page that says email or DM.
So,
and that'll continue to get updated.
Yeah, I think, and obviously you're literally just going to ship the thing so people can try it, and I think that's a useful way. But maybe articulating some good stuff uses might be interesting to aim people in the right direction. So, mango lover rather than hater. Label images of whether they're cats or dogs, and then make a cat feed out of it. That's only, for Yas, imagine a feed that's only calming colors, or something like that, right? Or something that the art or photography nerds could use to easily ad hoc label. I think the ad hocness is actually really delightful. And I think the other part ends up being, I think you should write even more in a way that says, like, look, I'm trying to make this fully peer-to-peer cooperative. I think, like, you've said it and you hinted it, but I know you have lots of reading and thoughts about this. So even having something to point at of being like, hey, this base thing is saying, can we? And in fact, who does have power? And what are those tensions? It's super, super interesting for certain types of people, and what might be nice to have that in a place that and then people are like, oh, I get it. Because there is definitely a long tail of people who don't really feel that's a thing that I would like to do in Bluesky and more broadly around software is engage people with agency, and say you can get involved, right? So I think, as your example of, I was trapped in the Facebook machine, and good fucking luck getting anyone at Facebook to respond to fucking anything ever, right? Of these large systems, right? I certainly do worry. Like, I have a hosted Google account, and I'm like, if something ever goes wrong with that, it's just going to disappear in a puff of smoke. Yeah. Peer scale systems, maybe there's something there.
Yeah, I think what you said about trying to engage people with agency is really at the core of this. Because and I appreciate the skepticism and the because it's totally warranted. I think that there are a lot of threat vectors with this sort of thing. And so I'm trying to be conscious of those and minimize them as much as possible. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's trying to open up new avenues of agency, which can be dangerous, but can also be really rewarding and fulfilling. So
amazing. Thank you so much for the discussion and the presentation.
Yeah, thank you everybody for being here and the feedback. I really appreciate it. And yeah, keep it coming. Any comments or thoughts or anything, please reach out and send them my way. Can I get like a copy of this chat? Oh, I can save chat.